Good evening. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine.
Well, damn, I'm from Russia.
What do you talk about on this chat roulette?
Everything.
Example?
About life, work.
Let's give it a try. Maybe you have an interesting question. I mean, about the war with Russians. Well, that's also about life, right? Specifically about the war.
And how do you feel about Russians? Ordinary ones, not the military or the government?
I feel negatively.
Why the negative attitude towards civilians if they have no power over the government or the military actions against Ukraine?
Well, it's by their own will that they have no power over their government. It's an unwillingness to do anything, an unwillingness to change, an unwillingness to take responsibility. Those who don't support the war are helping to bring it to an end, helping Ukraine to win. As a victim in this war, of course, the attitude is completely positive. No questions at all. Conversely, an American supporting this war gets an extremely negative attitude. Your stance on the war truly serves as a crucial litmus test for understanding your underlying value system. That's how it would be in Russian, to put it that way. If you don't support the war, that's already a good start. But if you reside in Russia, you are, at a minimum, backing this war through your taxes. You're endorsing it with your silent agreement, thereby enabling the authorities to perpetuate this lawlessness. If the government knew about your constitutional article, which declares that the people are the ultimate source of power, and if you had demonstrated this power to your authorities forcefully, then the government would indeed act according to the people's desires. However, as long as people do not assert their desire and readiness to influence power, then, well.
Regarding taxes. For tax evasion, you could be facing, if you'll excuse my language, either an enormous fine or even a restriction of your freedom.
I comprehend what you're saying. However, you do realize that it's just the same as during the Second World War, when regular German civilians were, some willingly, some unwillingly, participants in that war.
World War II, much like all global conflicts of its kind, possesses such significant differences. They're quite a few times more substantial in scale. They are, if not several dozens of times, considerably larger in scale. And the fact that NATO countries are supporting one side, while the opposing side is already taking on the role of a terrorist state, is a significant issue. However, it's not right to condemn the entire country under these circumstances because there are ordinary citizens who don't even contribute by paying taxes. I do not pay taxes as I am not formally employed, and therefore I do not have official employment because of my age. My mom pays taxes because she is forced to. She truly has no other choice. I really don't want my family to break the law.
Look,
there are even younger children, like newborns just brought home from the hospital. They don't support the war. They have no idea what it's about. Why do they get such treatment? In those same social networks right now, one of which is actually prohibited within the Russian Federation, Instagram. If you go there and read just one post about the current situation, there is a negative attitude toward absolutely all citizens of the Russian Federation, toward newborns, infants, 1-year-olds, and 10-year-old children. My sister, she's 10 years old, she has no idea about some war or some special military operation. Consequently, she does not condone this in any shape or form. My 2 5-year-old sisters, they definitely don't know anything. They don't even have phones, nor do they have access to news or social networks. They just watch cartoons and that's it. Why is there such a negative attitude towards them?
Well, look, about taxes. The point is, you're specifically referring to income tax. You don't get a salary, you don't pay that tax, but you do pay VAT. The value-added tax. Approximately 20% of the price of every product you purchase within Russia is allocated to the state budget. That's what I meant about taxes. Now, regarding the attitude towards small children. maybe someone emotional. Well, imagine a missile hits a house, and for example, a woman's entire family is killed. Her small children are killed. It's a cry from the soul. She might write something somewhere, perhaps even words that she might later come to regret. It's understandable that young children don't comprehend anything. In legislation, small children aren't considered legally capable or disposobnymi in Russian. Their parents are responsible for them. And for what children do and where they are, their parents are responsible. So all questions go to the parents. Of course, there are no complaints against the children. Nevertheless, these very children, they nonetheless constitute, as it were, we must grasp this, we must frankly articulate and pinpoint it clearly, that a significant number of these children, even so, represent an integral cog within this overarching system. That doesn't mean these children should. Nobody is talking about that. In general, when there's talk of a victory against Russia, it essentially refers to pushing Russia back to its own territory. No one is discussing the destruction of Russians or dropping any nuclear bombs. That's a threat only Russia makes to others. A victory over Russia would signify the re-establishment of control over all the occupied Ukrainian territories. Complete compensation for all of the material losses that Russia has caused. That is true victory. No one is saying that every person and child needs to be destroyed. That's not what's being discussed. However, every individual within the Russian Federation needs to recognize their role and accountability. How you choose to handle that responsibility is entirely up to you. You're discussing major wars after all. So, if I understand correctly, you're equating both sides. A brawl is a brawl, and a war is a war. But in every fight and in every war there's an aggressor, the one who attacks, and there's the one who defends. Take the Second World War. You wouldn't be telling me there's one side and then another completely separate side. You would say that Germany, they are criminals. They were the aggressors, and the Soviet Union was defending itself. We cannot say that these two sides are identical. We cannot treat these sides the same way. Right now you're acting like someone who sees a fight on the street, sees three people beating up one person on the ground, and you tell the person on the ground, well, you're part of the fight too, but he's the victim. He was attacked. And any court, whether it's an international court or a domestic court, like one in Russia, for example, will judge the attackers, and they won't treat the victim merely as a participant in a brawl or a war. This individual is a victim. Currently, Ukraine is the victim, which is why numerous countries are providing aid, just as they assisted the Soviet Union during the Second World War. Yes, that was on a larger scale, larger in terms of the number of people. Technological advancements occur, and objectives previously accomplished, for instance, with the involvement of 2,000 people. Now, technologically speaking, this can be accomplished by a group of 5 individuals utilizing some high-tech weaponry, but that is not the crucial point. You do not support this view. That's perfectly fine. However, you must realize that you are inherently a part of this situation, and something needs to be done about it. For instance, you could leave the country. In general, I advise Russians to actually fight for their country. Well, consider this. We experienced the Maidan, which is often a subject that many Russians attempt to exploit for their own narratives. We saw that our government was doing things we disagreed with. And we, Ukrainians, went out and fought against our government. Many people were hurt. Some were thrown into prison, others were persecuted and taken into the woods. But there is truly no alternative. When you're attacked, you must protect yourself. And when you act in self-defense, it inherently carries risk. You could be injured, you might endure suffering. But you're choosing between two terrible options, either attempting to fight back against your oppressor or submitting and becoming their slave. All Russians are now explaining, yes, we can do nothing, but you are 140 million. You can, I don't know, just arm yourselves with sticks and flails, not with posters, not with white sheets. No one believes that. That only really works in a civilized society where the government actually listens to its people. And when the government doesn't listen, it must be forced physically. It's all very painful, it's bad. But what other way is there? Either you remain subjects of Putin and this system, or you fight against him. I get it. You're a woman. You have a mother, a sister, so you won't fight. At the very least because you are physically weaker than, for instance, the police. Nevertheless, you have the option to move to another country, for example.
I can't.
Why not?
Firstly, my family cannot travel abroad because my mother is subject to military service, and so is my entire family in general.
Okay, so if your mother gets called up for the war, what then?
My mother works at a defense enterprise, so she won't be called up for the war. She serves as the director of a defense enterprise. There isn't any other director. If she were ever called up, and if her presence was truly vital, she would have been summoned much earlier, not now, when initial peace talks concerning peace are already taking place.
So you understand that your mom is a direct participant. She's helping Russia arm itself. She's a direct participant. If you, for example, are merely a sponsor by purchasing specific products, then she is an immediate and direct participant. Meaning if your mom didn't perform her duties, then someone on the front line would not receive some kind of weapon. So your mother directly influences the effectiveness of Russia's aggressive war. That's how I view this particular conflict. For Russians, it's a war of conquest, but for Ukrainians, it's a defensive war of liberation, since we are defending ourselves on our own territory, in our own home. The Russians came into our home, and your mother is now directly influencing the overall effectiveness in her own, perhaps small sphere of activity. However, you mentioned she is a manager. So once again, it's crucial to understand that the initial and most vital acknowledgement is the responsibility for all that Russia is currently doing. Well, look, in the trenches are ordinary people, ordinary Russians. Ordinary Russians vote for Putin. In this roulette chat, I encounter everyday Russians who scream, "You should be cut down and exterminated." It's not Putin in the trenches, nor Shoigu riding in a tank. It's the average Russian. And ordinary Russians continue to endure this situation. Ordinary Russians truly persist in paying taxes, voting for Putin, joining the army, and it's typical Russians who continue to manage the defense industry. Putin really is only one individual. Why do you all put up with this? Again, this isn't solely directed at you. I understand you're a woman. You are physically weaker. That's perfectly normal. You're unable to leave. So, you see, through your taxes, your mother is directly involved in the process of supplying the weaponry that is flying toward our children. How am I supposed to take that, for example? From Russians?
And Russian children aren't dying?
Russian children?
A couple of months ago, not just one drone, but rather fragments from it, struck a residential building close to my home. This happened despite our air defense systems working flawlessly. However, if one truly looks at the essence of this situation, it is not merely a war of conquest, as you have suggested, but it is absolutely essential to fully comprehend the circumstances that have been unfolding for not just one, but indeed many years within the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics. I know perfectly well what has been happening in those areas. I had more than one friend, more than one acquaintance living there, and they all currently live in the Russian Federation, quite content with this.
See, you gave me some good advice, now go figure it out. We'll figure out why you came to our country to sort things out for us. We'll figure it out. That's the point. We'll sort things out in Ukraine. If you have any grievances against Ukraine, that's precisely why the UN and the OSCE were established. That's exactly why they were created. After the Second World War, people realized that if a war were to start every time someone took issue with something, as you mentioned, that was an initial problem. However, with the advent of incredibly powerful, high-precision and nuclear weapons, people understood that one simply cannot just go and engage in warfare. Russia has not taken Ukraine to court. Russia didn't initiate any lawsuits, nor did it submit any applications or petitions. It didn't reach out to the UN to examine this matter, nor did it take any action at all. It simply proceeded to invade. Now, even if it had right that someone was being oppressed in Luhansk and Donetsk, why did no one else in the world say anything about it? Yes, America is against Russia, and so is Britain. But why didn't China say anything about it? Why didn't friendly India say anything? Why is it that nobody apart from Russia asserts that anything unlawful was occurring in Luhansk and Donetsk? Because there wasn't. When, for instance, the OSCE dispatched a special monitoring mission to Ukraine, and as the OSCE along with other countries began investigating, they ultimately reached the conclusion that Ukraine wasn't oppressing anyone, anywhere, but rather Russia was involved in the occupation and seizure of Crimea first, then Donetsk, then Luhansk. Russia was the one who...
If you dig into Crimea's history, it used to be... It belonged to the Russian Empire.
And Kuban once belonged to Ukraine, so what of it? You see, back in 91, upon the dissolution of the Soviet Union, treaties were inked, and in these agreements, all the nations, including Russia and Ukraine, acknowledged one another's borders. It doesn't say anywhere that, Crimea was Russian, or Donetsk belonged to someone else. Everyone acknowledged it. So here we have Ukraine, which incorporated Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. Russia then stated, "We have no territorial claims." I can show you a video from 2008 where Putin is being interviewed by a foreign journalist. The journalist asks him, after the invasion of Georgia, "Will Crimea be next?" And he replies, "No, not at all. What are you talking about? We respect the territory, we have no claims, we have nothing against it." What significance does what transpired in 1956 hold, if by 2008 it was officially and unofficially recognized that Crimea is indeed Ukrainian territory? This makes it quite clear, doesn't it? You are bringing up the issue of Russian children suffering. They are suffering in the exact same way that German children suffered back when Soviet troops were advancing on Berlin, not with the intent to capture the city or harm German children, but rather to physically compel Germany to withdraw and surrender. And where there's combat, people suffer and children suffer. When Russia bombed Chechnya's Grozny, it wasn't intentionally bombing children, yet many children died. Where there's fighting, people suffer. This is precisely why war is horrific. It's precisely those who start this war, Russia in this case. That's why Russia is treated this way. But you and I have talked and we've come to the conclusion that you do in fact support this war. You say it's not an invasion, that it's justified.
I don't support the war, I support my country.
And your country is now killing Ukrainians. How should I feel about someone supporting the aggressor who kills Ukrainians? And now by talking we've established that you do support the war.
Your last two presidents are both so innocent and harmless. Zelensky and Poroshenko are prime examples, so innocent and harmless. The President of America, the USA, also appears so white and fluffy. Yet from the very beginning, even prior to the start of military actions, upon ascending to his current throne, his present position, he initiated aggression toward the Russian Federation.
What aggression? Please specify.
Read the news.
I've read it all, inside and out. That's exactly why I wanted to ask you. Poroshenko is all white and fluffy, and Zelensky is all white and fluffy. But what exactly did they do to Russia?